Hey everyone, I'm Jeanette Mulvey, the editor-in-chief of Co. by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the seventh episode of Start, Run, Grow. And of course, this is our Start, Run, Grow week, so this one is extra special. As we all know, inflation, supply chain problems, increased cost of hiring are all making it difficult for businesses to maintain pricing and having to develop pricing strategies around solving all of these problems. So today that's what we're talking about. The whole hour is about pricing. We have a great small business owner who has a really interesting story, and we have two experts who will talk about pricing strategies and how you can deal with them. Now, as a reminder to you, throughout the program, you can ask questions of our speakers, and you can do that by typing in that panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll ask them of each guest a little later in my interview with them. Now, before I get started and introduce our guests, I wanted to thank our sponsors, Dell Technologies, Edelman Financial, FedEx, Iron Mountain, MetLife, and Oracle NetSuite. We appreciate all of your continued partnership in this series. We really couldn't do it without you. So let's start. Our first segment is our start session. And I'm going to introduce Phil Dumonte. He is the CEO and co-founder of Whole Soul Blend Bar. That's SOL. And he is based in Boulder, Colorado. So Whole Soul is the first all organic blend bar in the United States. And Phil was recently named on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. Interestingly, before he founded Whole Soul, he owned Dashed, one of the largest privately owned restaurant delivery platforms, which was acquired by Grubhub in 2017. So Phil knows what he is talking about. Welcome, Phil. So tell us specifically how your business is being impacted by prices. Like what is the biggest issue for you?
Our biggest issue, Jeanette, is supplier pricing and the increased cost of our ingredients, right? We're a restaurant, so just the increase across the board from our suppliers on our produce, bananas, avocados, our utensils, napkins, everything that obviously goes into a restaurant and serving our customers has gone up substantially. That's on our existing restaurants. We are also building out 2 new restaurants in Colorado and are experiencing price increases on equipment. Refrigerators, walk-in coolers, blenders have all gone up substantially. So the cost to operate our business on our existing store level has increased due to those raw ingredients going up. And then also to build out new locations and expand the business has also gone up substantially.
So I would imagine that if you absorbing a price increase is a challenge when the product that you're selling isn't super high price. You know what? Is that Phil? Is that music coming from you? Do you know? I just want to give you a moment to shut it off. It's just I don't want you to have to focus on the question. If you could, maybe there's just another window open, another browser window.
I don't think it's on my side.
Okay, we won't worry about it. So what I was going to say is that if you are selling a higher priced item and you have to increase the price, it's a smaller percentage, right? Than if you're selling something in your restaurant that costs $8 and you have to increase the price. Like your customer's going to really notice that in a way that they wouldn't if it was a bigger item. So can you just talk about that? How do you deal with sort of managing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, for us as a restaurant, we're always looking at our labor and our food costs, our 2 largest prime costs. And we're always targeting to be between 30 and 35% food costs. 30% is the benchmark in our industry. We go a little bit higher since it's all organic food and produce that we're purchasing. But as a rule of thumb, we're always looking at that 30 to 35% number, looking at our benchmark pre-COVID, pre kind of inflationary period, how much were we spending on food And looking at it as a percentage is really the best way for us to understand it. So once we're starting to see the cost of avocados, bananas, produce in general going up substantially, maybe we're hitting at one point 40, 45% food costs for our items, that's when we decided, okay, it's time that we can no longer absorb that much of an increase and need to start passing along some of that to our customers as well.
So how do you I don't want to say equation, because equation actually sounds like I literally mean numbers, and so I don't. What I mean is, like, what's the mental calculus you do before you decide when it's time to raise a price?
Yeah, we're always looking at this as a long-term kind of problem, I would say, and challenge. So we definitely are conservative and wait, because we understand the impact of pricing can be significant on demand. And people are also really tired of seeing things go up in price. So generally speaking, if some of our produce or items go up, and they fluctuate on a weekly basis, seasonally, that's common, even kind of a pre-inflationary period. We will wait, several months, 3 months at least, to really assess, what how sticky these price increases have been to us, and also as a kind of mental calculus too, just understanding where it's going as well. So we have very transparent conversations with our suppliers saying, okay, I understand, strawberries went up by X% this month. What does it look like 2 months, 3 months? Are things easing up at all? And because we have a close relationship with suppliers, they can really give us a sense of where the market's heading on some of these popular items, and then we can make the decision, like we did 6 months ago, that this is a challenge that we're going to be experiencing for at least another year, 18 months, 24 months. There's no way we can continue to absorb this kind of these price increases for that amount of time. So I think forecasting out and looking where things are going is really important in that as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring up your relationship with suppliers, because it doesn't, having a good relationship with them isn't going to mean that the price isn't going to increase. But I think, to your point, it's not just a numbers game, right? It's about having that open dialogue so that you understand what's coming, right? And maybe they're going to go back down and you don't need to raise the prices. So I think do you want to just talk a little bit more about that relationship component between you and your suppliers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just we do weekly check-ins with our suppliers. We talk about price locks as well. Say we understand that, they're also experiencing challenges. Of course, the cost of them acquiring products is going up as well. So it's all passing down. But just having a really open conversation about, can we lock in the price of avocados for the next 30 days at X price? That would give us some security and understanding of where we're going to be at. Are there other items that we can kind of price lock for a certain amount of time, and then we'll revisit it? So I think that's really important. And then also not being necessarily wed to just one supplier. We work with a variety of different suppliers, and having that open conversation, across the board with them to see where we can just have better communication.
So speaking of communication, I got to think that a big part of being able to raise your prices but not alienate your customers is in how well you communicate that price increase to your customers. So what is your approach to that?
Yeah, as with anything related to communication, I think early and often are the two words that we use here, and I think is the best strategy. So we've shared, price increases that are coming down the line, before they occur, early, by email, by social media channels, and then often in just explaining, why this is happening, just enticing kind of presentation of information, infographics on social media, being like, this is what goes into the cost of an avocado toast. The avocado is now this much more. The toast has gone up this much, and there are a lot of different supply chain, issues that go along with it. Customers really do understand when you are being upfront, are transparent, and communicate. I think it's when things come out of left field, or some trying to pull the wool over your eyes or not be transparent, that's when you get into those challenges. So as early as often as many channels as possible. Not everyone's reading the email, everyone's on Instagram. So just looking for other ways to communicate that. And we do it in store as well. So trying to meet customers where they're at to really just communicate, hey, this is why things are going up. We don't like it either. And also just looking forward, we're very transparent. We say, as soon as we have an opportunity to bring things down, we will. This is not some kind of permanent situation that we're trying to impose on customers either. We are, actively renegotiating prices with suppliers, looking at other suppliers, and once things ease up in the supply chain as well, if we have a chance to bring it down, we will. And really responded well to that.
I think that this also speaks to having a relationship, because if you already have a relationship with your customers, and they trust you and they've come to, I guess, trust, they have an emotional connection to you beyond it being transactional, then it seems like you'd be more likely to be able to share this messaging with them and have them be receptive to it. Let's talk a little bit about alternatives to raising prices. I mean, are there things that you're able to do that allow you to absorb these cost increases without having to raise the prices?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeanette. So outside of raising prices, I would say, first of all, going back to what we talked about, having alternative suppliers as well definitely makes a difference for us. We always thought, well, the price of bananas would be the same for whoever we shopped with, whoever we purchased our bananas from. And that actually wasn't the case, because different suppliers have different ways of doing things and different operational efficiencies. So it's not just, it doesn't have to just be, a non-negotiable in that this is what the price is. I would encourage business owners to shop around and find alternatives, as that's going to be your best negotiation and leverage with your suppliers. But we also looked at the data and looked at our recipes and said, if there are certain items that have gone up more than others, raspberries, for example, for whatever reason, have gone up exponentially more than blueberries and strawberries. So we started to make substitutions on some of our smoothies and bowls where, again, made that case up front, but said that we'll be subbing out strawberries instead of raspberries. And small changes like that obviously can make a big difference to our bottom line when margins are already tight. So tweaking recipes to simplify them, to make substitutions for items that haven't gone up as much. And then also simplifying menu items as well. So we're looking at the bottom 10, 20% of our menu and making cuts to some of those items and removing them from the menu, because those are just another opportunity to simplify and clean things up from an operational standpoint. We don't need to carry as much inventory, which will reduce waste and cost on our end. So I think outside of renegotiating pricing, finding alternative suppliers, our big two initiatives to find alternatives has been tweaking our recipes, following the data, and cutting out low-performing items.
So that was a very interesting thing that you just said. And actually, during the pandemic, I heard a lot of business owners say this kind of same thing, that it's interesting that things they force you to look at your business in a different way and make changes. And you're in a particular situation because your inventory is perishable, right? So it's not like you could buy something that maybe isn't your best seller, but it could sit around for 6 months until somebody does buy it. If you have items that don't sell as much as others, they're only going to be good for a couple of days. So I like this idea that it's forcing you to sort of be more lean and mean in terms of your menu and your offerings, and really look at what's selling. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to get to some audience questions. So I want to just ask you my last question, because I think that this applies no matter what business someone's in, like no matter what they are selling. In an economy where we're experiencing inflation, consumers are making choices, and they start to think in terms of what they must have, what they really, really want to have, and things they really didn't put a lot of value in or aren't really enjoying anyway. And you really need to find a way for your business to be in one of those first two categories. So what you sell is really not a necessity for people, right? So you need to be in that category of like, this is a thing it's not a necessity, but I really, really want it. So I'm going to spend this money. So how do you go about making sure you're a must have for people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it starts with really knowing your customer and why customers come into your business. So, we do a lot of research and customer surveys and feedback on this and ask why are customers coming to Wholesale? And to your point, to some customers, it's not a necessity. But to a lot of customers, what we're hearing is people are more health conscious than ever. They're very aware of what they're eating, and they want fast casual, quick, healthy option. So once we hear that feedback, we double down and kind of marketing and reframe ourselves as, well, this is a must-have. This is vital to take care of your health in this kind of environment. So just knowing why are people coming to your business? It doesn't, if it's that's it for Wholesale, but it could apply to any business, whether it's a beauty salon for your customers who really care about the way that they present themselves, or a heating and air conditioning business. Of course, those are vital components to your life, not necessarily must-haves, but in certain moments they are, and in restaurants in general, everyone has to eat. So I think just knowing your customer, understanding why are they coming to your business, what's the number one reason? For us, it's healthy food. And then reframing kind of our marketing around Wholesale's offering, healthy food at an affordable price, and really marketing ourselves to that point, and so that people understand, why they're coming in, and really kind of just doubling down on that message.
Great. I love that advice for everyone, no matter what business they're in. So my last question, I think, is this person is asking, how do I react to my competitors' prices? And I just want you to touch on that, because being reactionary is not always the best business strategy. And I'm sure there are people that sell something similar to what you sell for cheaper. Mm-hmm. So how do you go about differentiating yourself and not getting in a downward spiral with prices?
It's a really great question. And I think going back to that transparency point of it's not just quantitative, there is a quality component there. That's really important. And then for us, we distinguish ourselves. Why is Wholesale? Why could it be more expensive than another juice bar down the street? To your point, should we react by lowering prices because they did? Well, for us, we have a USDA organic certification, and we've invested a lot in that. So all of our food and our juices are USDA organic certified. So it's a higher standard, it's a higher quality, and generally speaking, people understand that, if you're going to get a higher quality service or product, you're going to pay more. And I think that applies to any business. On the front end, you could, someone else down the street can be a little bit cheaper of a service, could be a little bit cheaper of a restaurant, just come in a little bit less. But you do have to look at what is that experience going to be for you. Maybe it won't be as consistent of experience. Maybe they won't show up on time if it's a service-based business. And there's a cost to that can really exceed any kind of savings on price. So I think pointing out to customers, going back to where, not being very upfront about, yes, there is a premium in certain cases, but here's why. We serve a higher quality X product, higher quality Y service. This is what you come to expect when you're ordering from this service or Wholesale, and that really helps to explain the pricing. So I would definitely hesitate to kind of get into that pricing war and really stand on what makes my service, what makes my restaurant valuable to you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Believe it or not, we've used up all our time, Phil. I want to say thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. And I think this was really good information for our audience. So thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate the time.
Take care. All right. Before we move on and interview my next guest, let's do a poll. Who's ready? The question is, what is the biggest factor impacting your price decision making? So the answers that you can choose from are inflation, workforce shortage, supply chain issues, market demand, and other. And I see inflation is winning. And Yeah. I wish I knew what the other was. Can someone in the audience type and tell us in the chat what, in Slido, if you can, in the comments, what the other is? I'd be curious to know. Okay. Thank you for voting. We are moving on now to our run session, and I'm going to stop talking while we play our fun little intro. So let's do that. All right, I want to introduce Julie Poland. She is a strategic advisor at the Proactive Leadership Group. Since 1990, she has provided process and structure for business leaders to transform their organizations and achieve improved results and sustainable growth. She is also an active SCORE mentor, and we thank you for that service, Julie. So welcome, and let's get started.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we described your business, but just tell us a little bit more about what you really do.
For the most part, I work with CEOs and their senior teams. Their businesses are either in rapid growth mode and they want the growth to continue without the cart running off the trail, or they have been growing and suddenly they've kind of reached a stuck point and they're trying to get unstuck and back in action. It's been wonderful to see a lot of businesses come out of COVID, which for many created a bit of a stall or a slowdown, and they're rocking and rolling in 2022, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, that's great. So you talk to a lot of businesses, which is why you're here, because I think you can give us a little broad, a broad perspective. So what are some of the trends you're seeing with how small businesses are dealing with pricing issues?
Well, there are really a couple different ways to go, and you touched on them earlier in the specific example that Phil was giving, and that is you can either wait it out and see what's going to happen. A lot of companies will choose to do that specifically if they're concerned about customer loyalty. Maybe they're in a really competitive environment. They're concerned since everyone is hearing that I word, inflation, every day. They don't want somebody to run scared before they need to, especially if things are going to rebound a little bit. Or if they do need to increase prices, they're taking the early and often approach, where they'll do incremental changes in prices so that there's no big chunk that becomes noticeable. So I'm sure as consumers, many of us experience that with our favorite subscriptions. It was $4.99, now it's $5.25. And if we want that service or that product enough, we're willing to pay a little more for it.
Yeah. So you're sort of touched on what I was going to ask you next, which is, as a business owner, like raising prices is a really stressful decision. So how do you suggest businesses balance that decision or with whether to try to absorb the higher costs because they don't want to risk losing customers?
Right. Well, there are a couple ways to go at it. Some companies have chosen to package services. An example in food services that we'd all be familiar with would do you want fries with that? So sometimes in that packaging or bundling of services or products, they can find ways to pass along a little bit of their cost. Another example would be if you order more than $50, you get free delivery. So because things are bundled together, it becomes a little bit easier to raise the price without it being objectionable. Another way that some clients of mine have been doing it is forming subscription services or licensing services where somebody agrees to purchase continuously over a period of time. In a service business, they may have a retainer so that every month someone gets used to paying a certain amount. It's a different type of relationship, which changes the pricing game altogether. In that kind of situation, the customer always knows what they're going to pay. And it's really up to the vendor then, the business offering the service, to determine what fits within that subscription or that licensing box. One other thing that they've been doing, I've seen, is loyalty discounts or volume discounts, where they might pass on an overall price increase. But if you are a frequent flyer, if you're a person that makes routine purchases or bulk purchases, you can stay out of the price increase, at least for now.
So before, I was saying to Phil that pricing isn't just a numbers issue, but it's a relationship issue. And we were talking about the relationship with his customers and his vendors. And you, I know, also think about it as a leadership issue. So can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yes, I guess the best way to describe it is to think about being in the war room in a company with the CEO and the senior folks that are helping things happen. And when I say senior folks that help things happen, I don't necessarily mean a big corporate environment. I mean the key people that are running operations, that are running marketing, all the various aspects of the business. We can get involved in a situation where we're used to things the way they've been. Of course, how could we really say that's the case now between COVID and inflation and all kinds of changes that are happening now? We have to be nimble. That means a leader needs to be communicating more often. They need to be tight with their senior team, because it's an all hands on deck kind of moment. The other thing is, at different places in the organization, people are going to see different things. So if your intelligence about vendors, your intelligence about market movement might not all be held in that same person. The people that have access to that information need to be talking to one another candidly, so the organization can make decisions. In addition to that, companies used to be planning on a much longer time frame. They might be planning according to their budgeting process, or looking out 3 years or 5 years. Now, what they need to be doing is looking quarterly, monthly, as things are changing, to make sure they're on top of current situations, near term projected situations, and then make decisions accordingly to those.
Yeah, that's so interesting how much of this really on both sides of the business isn't just about money, right? It's always about relationships and setting expectations. Um, we talk a lot in this series about financial planning for the future. And so whether you've just started your business, or you're just getting ready to start a business, or you've been in business a long time, you're always trying to build a financial plan for yourself. And the more unknowns, the more difficult it is to create that plan. And I think we're in a situation where even established businesses who maybe have a history that normally they could rely on this history of data, it's not necessarily so accurate anymore. So what are your thoughts about how people need to be planning financially for the future right now?
Well, my clients are always looking at, where do they stand with cash? Cash is the oxygen for the business. So they're trying to be conservative sometimes on what investments they're making in the business. The other thing they're trying to do, and this doesn't sound financial, but it's a hidden spot that sometimes we don't think of looking. If people really want to get the maximum benefit from the work they're doing, they're also looking at their processes. Their key processes, through waste, through delays, can be costing them money that actually could go right to the bottom line if they take the process apart, see where the waste is, put it back together in a way that's going to be faster, which customers generally like right now. Everybody wants speed. They want it right when they want it. They don't want to wait. And it could be taking actual dollar cost, maybe even reduce the amount of materials that an organization needs to purchase in order to give the same amount of product or service.
Okay, good. So you were talking before about like creative pricing strategies, and I think one of the things you mentioned was like bundling things together or subscription pricing. And the bundling thing, all of those pricing strategies made me think about the difference between value and price, which is something we don't really we're always thinking about price, but we don't talk about value a lot. So first of all, can you explain like really what the difference between value and price is? Because I think it's a perception thing on the consumer's part, and like why that's so important right now.
Sure. Well, when you're setting a price, you're thinking about what are the cost of the materials that I need? What's the amount of labor that I have to put in? What amount of profitability do I need to build in to pay Uncle Sam, to keep the lights on, to invest in new equipment and so forth. So, cost plus margin equals price. With value, it relates more to what does it do for the customer? What problem does it solve? What reward does it give the customer? What consequence does it help or risk does it help the customer avoid? And value is really the combination of what benefits it gives to the customer plus what consequences it helps a customer avoid. So it can be a really big deal, for instance, for me to drive a BMW to work. Do I need a BMW? Well, really, no, I don't need a BMW. No offense to BMWs. I need something with four wheels that's going to get me from point A to point B. But for me, if I see value in having, I don't know, a really great way of taking corners, or if I want to uh, have all my neighbors' faces green with envy, those are values that are not money oriented, but they're things that I get. They're ways that I get satisfied from spending that extra money for that BMW. As a matter of fact, I've had clients that will brag about how much they spent for something, not how little they spent for something, because it makes them feel good that they have it. Now, does everybody want to throw away money for the sake of getting a smile on their face? Well, of course not. There are other value related things like, does this make my job as an owner or an employee or whoever's consuming that product or service, does that make my life easier? Does it make it easier for us to grow? Does it give us a financial benefit? Will my customers like it better? I was thinking about the example of produce. There's nothing more appealing than some really great looking produce. And if you're in the business of having produce be visible to show the quality in your products, then you're going for the pretty produce. You want to manage cost, but you're having your organic designation because there are people that value that. They know what they're getting. So those are just some examples of the difference between value and price.
Yeah, I was actually going to use that example from Phil as well. I think, right? Like people value that certification. Excuse me. Before we go to the audience Q&A, I just wanted to ask you, Julie, if you want to do people, I like the three things because I think people can remember three and that's the max. So what are like three things people could do right now, business owners could do right now to start dealing with and thinking about pricing issues?
Excuse me. I think one thing that they can do is start looking at how often are they getting together as a leadership team so that they have the intelligence that they need. Second thing, I just totally got a brain cramp about what I was going to tell you as the second thing. Find ways to add find ways to add value to your products and services. Now, one of the ways to do that is to talk to your customers. Like Phil was talking earlier, it's only by asking your customers that you're really going to know what they're looking for. Don't guess, ask them. And the third thing would be to take a look at your key processes and see where there might be waste cost that you can take out of your process so that you have an additional margin and prices that you're receiving from your vendors are not necessarily a do or die element in your business.
So you just touched on a couple of things that I'm seeing in the audience Q&A. So one, and I want to make sure we're taking advantage of your like real expertise and seeing like behind the scenes at businesses. So this person said, what are some common places that businesses cut costs? Like where do you typically see businesses overspending on things that could really be cut when necessary?
One of the places that I see them overspending is and Phil alluded to this earlier when he was talking about menu items that you take off the list. A lot of times companies have too much in the way of inventory hanging around. They buy too early. Of course, you wouldn't do that with perishable items, but they'll buy too early or they'll produce too much too fast. Believe it or not, one of the places that a lot of companies are missing cash, this isn't a profitability thing necessarily, but they're not working hard enough on collecting. If this is business to business kind of thing, they're not working hard enough at looking at their billing and collection processes
Wow.
because they might have actually sold it, but they don't have the cash that's going to enable them to continue to operate the business. Those are two really key places that I see.
I was just reading something about accounts receivable not that long ago that said like if your accounts receivable anything over, I don't know, I think it was 6 months, you're 90% unlikely to collect it. So asking for the money before that 6 month mark or whatever it was, like reminding the customer is really important. We only have a moment left, so I guess I'll just ask you, just from a accounting perspective, like is there one number that people should be looking at in their own accounting that's sort of, is it net profit? Like what's the kind of one number people should be watching to make sure that the cost isn't eating away at the profit?
Well, where it all starts is with their gross margin, with the cost that goes into making your goods and the cost of materials that you need to make your goods. Um, what's that ratio? And there are places that you can find, and you talk to your accountant about this, places where you can find trade standards so you can see where you are relative to the rest of the industry. Anything beyond that gross margin, a lot of that is vanity expenses or other optional things that you don't have to do. If things get tight, you can choose to let some of them go.
Right.
But you want to keep the core of the business strong.
Right. Perfect. And we are going to end it right there. So I thank you so much for joining us, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. All right, audience, it is time for our grow session. Now, we're really, really lucky because we have a great journalist, Barbara Thau, our Co's feature editor, interviewed Susan Lee, who is the commercial strategy leader for EY, Parthenon Americas, and Susan has a ton of experience advising businesses on pricing, and we were super lucky to get her to agree to this interview with Barbara. So let's listen to the interview with Barbara and Susan.
So as EY Parthenon America's commercial strategy leader, Susan Lee works with clients across industry sectors, from consumer packaged goods to retail to industrial sectors, to develop strategies that generate results, including pricing strategies. She brings more than 2 decades of experience to advising Fortune 500 firms to small businesses on integrating profitable pricing strategies into their sales and marketing plans. She's a bona fide revenue growth expert. We're so pleased to welcome Susan Lee, who will share best practices and pricing strategies that generate concrete, measurable results that all small businesses can benefit from, particularly in this really challenging inflationary environment. Thank you, Susan. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Barbara.
I'm so happy to have you here. I'm so happy to dig in, and you have this sort of really tremendous bird's eye view of the business landscape from where you sit. As we said, you're overseeing clients that come from all different sectors. I would love to get your big picture snapshot of the key factors that businesses face as they make pricing decisions in today's landscape.
Yeah, the key factors the companies are facing are quite tremendous. We're not talking about just cost increases. We're also talking about supply chain being a struggle for the last 2 years, but now it's easing. And now at the point where consumers are struggling, we're sensing consumer sentiments really worried about the future. And so for businesses, when they're making pricing decisions, unlike the past 2 years where they can just pass on the price, pass on the cost to consumers, they're seeing that consumers are switching. So they have to be a lot more surgical in terms of where to take price, where not to take price, because otherwise they're going to see consumers switching away from them and they might be losing share and losing volume.
I love that term, surgical pricing, and it's interesting because I'm going to look at my cheat sheet as I always need to do. In terms of capturing the consumer's head space, I know that EY's CEO Outlook survey was interesting, was sort of picked up that consumers' demographics, changing demographics, were one of the biggest concerns and actually the biggest risks to their growth strategies, according to businesses. I'm curious what's important to say, and you already touched on it, about consumer trends and how in terms of pricing, and how have consumer trends impacted consumers' pricing expectations?
Yeah, so for the last few years, EY Parthenon has been studying consumers very closely. So we conduct this ongoing consumer survey to understand the sentiments, to understand how consumers are feeling. What we are noticing is, depending on the consumer segments and depending on the categories, consumers are switching their behaviors. So for example, when you're thinking about different products, some of the products consumers buy are discretionary. So clothing, consumer electronics, but some of the things we buy are not negotiable, such as we're still going to have to eat. So food staples or basic necessities are very different, let's say, than comparable discretionary products. So when we're studying consumers and their purchase behaviors in the last few years, we're noticing that now, especially in the last few months, consumers are saying, we're going to buy less for the discretionary products. And for the most part, they're also seeing a very tight budget. And so as inflation goes up, they're saying, well, we're going to switch. We're going to switch brands. We're going to switch to store brands. We're going to switch to cheaper alternatives. And so for companies that are potentially selling discretionary products, they may not have so much room to increase the price because consumers are at the point where they are switching away.
So just to pull back a second, I'm curious about, back to the basics, the core tenets of a effective, and not just effective, but profit generating pricing strategy in any market.
Yeah.
Love to get your insider take on that.
Yeah, pricing is a funny discipline. Many companies think about pricing as, I'm just going to set the prices. So a bottle of water is $1 versus, $1.50. But in reality, pricing is a lot more complicated than that. As a discipline, we always recommend companies look at pricing all the way from, what is your strategy? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve higher margin? Are you trying to achieve higher market share? Who are you trying to go after? What kind of customer segments? And what product are you using? So are you trying to capture the more premium market, or are you trying to go at more the value brand? So just even before you start to think about the price point, you have to start with that strategic intent. Then we go into the pricing, setting the prices, actually thinking about the price level, and then all the way to, if you're a B2B company, you use your salespeople to go after the implementation of pricing. How do you incentivize your sales force? And are you actually helping them tell a value story? So it's when we think about the tenet of pricing, is really all the way from your strategic intent to how you're implementing your price realization at the end.
So intent and execution, right?
Absolutely.
So in terms of a price, what's essential to say about a pricing strategy, core tenets of a pricing strategy in this inflationary environment?
Yeah, so the most important thing I would tell any company, large or small, is forget about average. If you are looking at the average number, it's meaningless. You have to look at your product segments and your customer segments carefully. Because once you get into the data, you will see that actually, depending on the category, depending on the product segments and your customer segments, they behave differently. And given the fact that consumers or customers have a lot of room to move around these days, you have to be surgical. You have to be able to find the segments that have more stickiness to your product or services. And you have to find the product that consumers or customers are willing to pay more, so that for certain areas you're taking price up, but then for certain other areas you're actually keeping price, or you might even need to provide more discount or promotions. But looking at average is likely going to lead to leaving money on the table.
So just so I understand, this is really important. Average meaning your average, taking the average of the customer base. You're saying don't do that. Be surgical and segment, right?
Yes.
That's the key in inflationary market. That's an very important distinction.
And I would say even for smaller companies, because we talk to companies large and small, I think smaller companies tend to say we don't have the resources to do the analysis. We may not have the system to dig into running fancy regression models. What I would say is we have seen smaller companies even using Excel, even using some basic tool to start looking at the numbers. So it can be done. And there's the scrappy way of doing it, and there's certainly multi-million-dollar way of doing it.
And that's what, perfect segue to my next question. In terms of what are the meaningful metrics that small businesses in particular, should be using to measure the success of their pricing strategy, whether it's a product or a service?
Yeah, so one of the most basic KPIs is,
key performance indicators, right? Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
Yes. Let's say your intention is to raise your price by 5%, and that's how you have changed your list price. Oftentimes, companies don't actually measure what is the net price they achieve. What I mean by that is, especially for a lot of B2B company or even B2C company, your list price goes through a journey of discounting to the customers. So for supermarkets, they will have a lot of flyers and promotions. For B2B companies, their salespeople may be offering customers their rebates or on invoice discounts. What companies oftentimes don't know is they may set the price increase at 5%, but once they go through that journey of discounting, they might be achieving only a 1% of price increases. And so even just the simple measure of what are we getting the net realized price is a critical piece. Now, the other one is, especially for B2B companies where salespeople make a lot of pricing decisions in the field, we always encourage companies to actually look at the price achievement by salespeople. So you can actually see which salesperson is actually doing a better job at price negotiation versus which other salespeople may need more coaching and training. And so that's another, not that complicated to do, but certainly a way to get to the bottom of price execution by looking at per salesperson their price achievement.
So per salesperson for B2B, and then the other metric, just to sum up real quick, because I want to get into some of the details, was what? The other, just to repeat that, you have that other wonderful one metric.
Is the net selling price.
The net selling price. Perfect.
Not only the list price, but the net
selling price. So let's just dig into some solutions. I'm curious, once again, from you have this wonderful perspective. What are effective pricing strategies and tools that you're seeing that are actually generating results that small businesses can leverage in today's market?
Yeah, so there's the immediate shorter term tactics, and then there's the longer term tactics. And I'm gonna not stick with all pricing, because pricing ties with your assortment, your portfolio, and also your services. From a short-term standpoint, we're seeing the starting point a lot of companies are doing is look at their portfolio of product and services and understand what are the products that can actually command higher premium. They may want to move away from the commoditized products that they're really not being able to get any margin at all. So even before they think about pricing, really understanding which are the product segments that they have the right to win and charge a higher margin, and start to adjust their product assortment. That's the starting point. And then also, as you're adjusting your product assortment, think about the supply chain implications, because you may want to actually sell a lot of products that you don't know if you're going to get the supply, especially with the holiday season coming up. You don't want to be going to your customer with an empty shelf. So taking into account the supply chain risk as you are planning your upcoming offering is critical. Then it goes to setting the pricing and setting the promotion. It goes back to avoid the average. Think about where are the places that you can actually charge a premium. Where are the places that ties better with the consumer trends, for example. And we know from our study that in the last few years, consumers actually have paid a lot more attention to health and wellness related product and services. And so those are the categories where consumers are likely going to value more versus categories that may not tie to the overall trend. Now, the other piece that we're seeing from the consumer study is sustainability is a very critical value driver for consumers. And so having those, selling those products and for those offerings that consumers actually care more about are places where you don't need to discount as much.
Excellent. So understanding the market, understanding where consumers are valuing and what they're valuing in the market now, it's sustainability, health and wellness, understanding where you particularly have the cachet, or for lack of a better term, to charge more, and also understanding the supply chain constraints and operating within that. So really data. Anything you want to say about technology that's accessible to small businesses in terms of pricing, and anything that small businesses can leverage in terms of tech as a helper?
Yeah, so there are a lot of pricing solutions that are out there. They tend to be pretty complicated pricing solutions that takes 18 to 24 months to implement. However, for small businesses where they do have the data, from an analytics standpoint, as I mentioned, you can use simple Excel, or there are a lot of data visualization tools such as Power BI or Tableau, where you can actually start to visualize and understand your pricing and price volume relationship in your business. And that doesn't require a massive software implementation. It's more data visualization. Again, this is a place where I know it can be scary for small businesses that may not have spent so much time in the data. But I've seen certainly a small investment in this area can help small businesses be a lot more surgical in their pricing decisions.
One holiday tip, we're leading into the biggest shopping season of the year where businesses generate disproportionate amount of their sales, many businesses. Any one thing that small businesses can or should know or lean into this holiday season in terms of pricing?
The most important thing is understanding the consumer trends. Consumers are saying they will buy less in terms of products, but spend more in terms of experiences. So for small businesses, if there are opportunities to tie in their offering with services, that enables them to get a more premium and potentially get more value from their consumers. Because just knowing that their consumers' budget is limited in this holiday season, especially for the low to medium income consumers, then you do want to understand what are the other areas that they might be willing to spend more and add those to your offering.
Perfect. Adding the service element, value add, knowing the trends into the holiday season, understanding what consumers are valuing. This was so incredible and helpful and wonderful, Susan. Thank you so much. I can keep talking to you, but we're out of
I
time.
love this conversation, Barbara.
Me
I hope
too.
we'll chat some more, and next time we'll do this in person.
I would love that. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
That really was a great interview. Actually, all of our guests, I thought this was such a substantive topic. So thank you to all of our guests, Phil, Julie, and Susan. Super helpful. Just as a reminder, Co has lots of articles on pricing and supply chain and inflation. So we hope you will come to us for more advice. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to the audience. We hope you enjoyed this whole Start, Run, Grow week. We'll be putting all of our events and videos on Co if you want to watch them again. Thank you to our sponsors, Dell Technologies, Edelman Financial, FedEx, Iron Mountain, MetLife, and Oracle NetSuite. And save the date because we're going to be doing this one more time this year on November 10th when we will be talking about how to create a fantastic customer experience, which is perfect because that's just what Susan Lee and all of my guests were talking about. You have to create a great experience and people will be willing to pay for it. So thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.